news about the public safety building project. So is there anything you'd like to say about it, or?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we touched on it earlier. I think it's been a conversation that's been a long time coming, right? It's been on the radar in the community for the last 5 or 6 years. It's a tough nut to crack, right? I mean, unfortunately, we've all known it was going to be a project that had a lot of zeros behind it, and it was going to require some capital to really fix and do right and poise the community and give our public safety professionals the tools that they need and the building that they need to do their job. The public, the current police department, they're operating out of a bus station, from the 1950s and 60s. Right. Fire's working out of a strip center, on the far edge of town, and our municipal courts working out of a temporary facility that they've now been in for over 15 years when they got kicked out of the bus station from KPD. So.
I didn't even know they were there.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So it's a tough issue, and unfortunately the community's kind of kicked the can down the road for a long time, and we're at a critical point where we got to figure it out.
Got to do something.
We got to do something.
Right.
And so.
So tell me what the committee's job is.
So the committee's charge was really tasked with: does it make sense to put these folks into one facility or at least one campus? Are there synergies that help with cost savings and efficiencies and operational efficiencies to having them in one place? Because our staff thinks that's the case, but we wanted certainly to be able to make that case to the committee. They've agreed that is the case, that they need new facilities and that makes sense for them to be in a location. We're now going through the effort of really talking about validating the square footage needs that have been identified for a couple of years, that we did a space needs assessment. We've had some new staff since then, right? We've had 2 new chiefs. We've got a new municipal court administrator. And so they've done a deep dive because they weren't necessarily involved with that space needs assessment a few years ago. Right. So they've done a deep dive on that with our architects and are looking at that and have a few different ideas on that. But generally, validating that space needs and then looking at what today's costs are. Unfortunately, again, pandemic has very much affected the construction industry, and so we're having to be realistic about, hey, these are the costs to put up a building these days.
And probably having that deadline be January 17th, I think?
15th, I think. January 15th.
Is good, because the truth is costs are going to go up from now till even then.
Well, I think, one of the takeaways that I had from that meeting on Tuesday was that John Harrison does a really good job of kind of shepherding that group, because it's 10 people on that committee. There are some people there who are scratching their head about the site situation, and it's like, well, that's part of the issue. The biggest, I think, takeaway I had from it was, that you don't plan for, was that when the city adopted the new building codes, it essentially changed the way that you had to build that building as well, which required an expense you don't really even know at this point, which is the safe room inside of it.
Right.
And so that was fascinating to hear that from the architect, who was in a very interesting setting, which is another story. They literally have their own command center, mobile command center.
Yeah.
Who did?
The architect. It was like they had a Sprinter van, Delane, that
Really?
they were broadcasting live from. And it was the coolest thing ever. It was just really cool. Anyway, that's another story. But that whole conversation, though, that he had, like, okay, listen, here's the building codes that we have to meet. We have to essentially build a structure inside of the structure, but it's not part of the structure, that in case something knocks it over, I mean, basically you're building a fallout shelter, essentially, inside of this thing. And who knows what that's going to cost. And the original plan that was presented in 2019 was, roughly like $500 a square foot, and now you're looking at, $600-700 a square foot, possibly in that range, if that's where the math is going to land. But it's an interesting conversation.
There probably, you could also make a case that there might be some saved monies by the sharing of some of the staff, and I would be curious to know how much, while you're weighing the costs, you also need to weigh what the benefits are so that you can balance it out.
At EA, one of the things that I thought was interesting too was that there was this conversation too about the confidentiality of the whole thing, and you don't have this and you don't have that because you don't want to have people in. You have to keep a confidential records for the police department, and fire department can't be in that part of the building. You don't want municipal court to have their lobby the same. There's a lot of little things in there. But to me, the one thing that struck me the most was the fact that in a situation like the winter storm, you want to have a unified command structure.
Absolutely.
How does that go into the thinking? Because I think the winter storm, I bet you if you ask every municipal leader in the state of Texas, they were like, oh my God, that thing kicked our ass every single day.
It did.
What was that like, and how important is that element to have?
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, it really, I think, provided an opportunity for our city staff to shine. Mm-hmm. They were basically 24/7 they're 24/7 all the time, but during emergency, we had our staff was on and on point for about 12 days straight. Yeah. And I think our weaknesses and our deficiencies in our buildings, particularly for our public safety professionals, really stood out at that. I mean, we had our police chief. Unfortunately, they didn't have our fire chief did not have power at their fire administration building. He was having to operate out of his truck just to be able to power up his computer so he could jump on a Zoom meeting and have an emergency operations meeting with us. That's not good. That's not good for the community. That's not an effective way to operate. We got it done, but it's not an effective way to operate, right? And so we need a good emergency operations center. And that, one of the things we talked about efficiencies, we talked about that safe room and that ability to give them a hardened space that, we know is rock solid, both from a communication standpoint, regardless of, a tornado coming through town or whatever that emergency may be, that they've got a space that they can get business done and they can take care of this community. So,
yeah. And I think you want to know everything you can know about what this building should look like. And so if you have a safe room that you maybe didn't plan for 2 years ago, you have a safe room. Right. I'd rather know now what all will be needed to make this building do exactly what you're going to spend money for it to do.
Yeah. And we knew there needed to be a training EOC component to it, and that space and adequate space for it. What maybe wasn't identified in 2019 was the level of hardening that needed to occur to satisfy those national requirements for the building code piece.
Interesting. Okay.
And the other part of that too is, I also say too, you just don't. The pandemic has also changed that too. Like, there's a question, among office space now, like if you go to the police station now, those guys are jammed into, like patrol guys are jammed into one area to write reports. Well, that's not really safe. That's not really good. You don't want to have anybody get sick because they're, interacting with each other. You want to have a safe spot for that. A lot of supervision, supervisors need to have offices for a lot of reasons. It's a really interesting thing, and I think there's also one of the things that I find fascinating about Texas is that if you look at all of the needs that are going to happen in this community, they've kind of been kicked down the can for a long time, Right. And probably one of the best conversations you ever heard was, I don't think anybody listened to her, unfortunately, was Sandra Yarborough saying, hello, we tried to pay for this out of our pocket in 1989, and we didn't have any money for it. We would never been able to build it. We would have built a crappy facility then. So we need to borrow this money to do this, and now the question is going to be is, because I don't think any of these costs that you guys are talking about, there was a comment made the other day about the school from a public official who called Peterson an unnecessary palace, essentially, or a palace. Stop building palaces, was the comment that was made. I don't see a palace being built here. I see a functional building, and the reality of it is it's expensive.
Well, and so if something looks good, but it also does its job. I mean, I think that the Peterson Middle School looks, it's not so much how it looks as how it operates. I mean,
when you go inside of it and you see how it functions, it makes sense.
Right.
That's why it costs so much.
It looks great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Talk about hardened spaces, I think it's like a lockdown facility, doors closed, so.
Well, what a jewel for the community, right? And I'll tell you, when we had folks previously, I mean, we talked about quality of life and that being a part of economic development. When previously you would drive by the middle school, the old middle school, you'd ask people to kind of turn their head and look the other way, right? And not to say that hadn't been a great asset in the community in the past, but it's showing its age, right? It's 56 years. Now you can drive by that new middle school and folks look at it and go, wow, this is a community that invested in itself.
That's right.
It's one of the most impressive public buildings, I think, in the area.
And I thought Tybee was when it was built.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's still beautiful.
It is still beautiful.
I disagree.
Well, compared to
I think they have a problem now. They need to reface Tivy now, because it looks Tivy's really nice on the inside though.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
It just looks. It just looks kind of. Honestly, it looks kind of dumpy compared to that palace up on the hill there.